Hi everyone, this is Pradeep from Sydney at 12:30 a.m. Yes, it is indeed 12:30 a.m. and I am very much wide awake. I am delighted to welcome you all to yet another session of GCC. GCC episode 25. And this is the second of the stars session. Why do we call it the stars session? It is about stars who define their own space but also have a manifold impact on everybody else. Today, I am delighted to present not one, not two, not three, but four stars. I have, with me today Professor Soumitra Dutta. He has been making waves. He has been making waves when as a young person, he's still very young, but as a young person, when he went to Cornell and set up the business school. And we shall discuss more about what all he's been doing. And he's now the dean elect at Oxford Business School. And along with Professor Datta, we have, like I said, not one, not two, but three ambassadors. Man, this is, I have first and foremost Ambassador Pradeep Kapur, जिसको हम प्यार से पीके बुलाते हैं. He is my batchmate. And then I have Ambassador Lal, or Lalte is the right word, और जिसको हम प्यार से लाल बुलाते हैं. And this third one is Professor Ashok, not Professor, Ambassador Ashok. But of course he is a professor nowadays. But जिसको हम प्यार से अशोक बुलाते हैं. So first of all, ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to all of these four people. And let me kickstart the session today, first and foremost with Professor Datta, जिनको हम प्यार से सौमित्र बुलाते हैं. सौमित्र का जो last word है ना, that is मित्र. Okay, so now, Soumitra, I am actually delighted to have you over because when I read through what all you have done, the list is very much quite long. When I look about the global innovation index, and in fact you might have seen me tagging in LinkedIn to the ministers in Australia when they've been talking about this has happened, that has happened. I said you need to have a comparative look at the global picture. And I have quoted the GIC over there, and I said it's a wonderful piece of work. And not to forget the Global Information Technology Report. And not to forget what all you did in terms of integrating three business schools at Cornell. But first and foremost, let's kind of revisit your journey as to what exactly happened once you were the young boy who finished IIT Delhi. Then what happened?
Pradeep, thank you so much for including me in this show. And it's an honor and a privilege to be actually sharing this podium with distinguished friends and colleagues who are all in themselves very distinguished career leaders. I think all of us share a common root in IIT system and IIT Delhi. And I certainly believe that none of what most of us have achieved, certainly I can speak for myself, whatever I've achieved would not have been possible without my experience at IIT Delhi. I owe my whole career to IIT Delhi. And of course, Berkeley also has had a very strong influence on my life because I did my PhD out there. But IIT Delhi was the foundations of it. And IIT Delhi is just an amazing, amazing institution. I'm very fortunate that actually Director Rao, who was just the outgoing director of IIT Delhi, he included me and invited me to join the International Advisory Board of IIT Delhi. So I got to see some of the more recent progress of the incredible campus and institution that we have. And I'm delighted to see that IIT Delhi has made such a lot of good progress in the last 30 years. So IIT Delhi is where the story started. And of course, after that, I did many of the usual things that many IITians do. I went for my higher studies to Berkeley, to the US. I did something unusual. I spent 20 years in Europe, and then I sort of returned to the US and Cornell, and now I'm sort of returning to Europe in some sense, going to Oxford in June of this year.
So, one thing which surprised me was that if I remember correctly, you did your PhD in technology. And from technology, you suddenly veered and became the dean of a business school. So, how did that happen? Was it just because you were coming from Europe and they thought maybe, that's the right move from technology to business, or what was the story behind that?
No, actually, when I was in Berkeley, already I was interested in business. So at Berkeley, I did my PhD in computer science, but I also did a master's in business administration. So I did it in parallel at the same time in Berkeley. I did those both degrees. So when I graduated, I had the choice of, either going into a business school or in a computer science department. And it so happened that I got an offer from the school in France, INSEAD. Uh, Going to INSEAD is not an obvious choice for many Indians at that point in time because, you go from India, Delhi to Bay Area, which is like the ideal destination technology. But I had met my wife in Berkeley, and she's from Spain, and she had a Fulbright scholarship. So she was required to go back to her home country, her home nation. And so, we had a young baby that was born around that time. And so I had to make the difficult decision of either to stay back in the US and stay separate or to, in fact, go to Europe for some time, with her. So when I went to and took the job at INSEAD, it is a job in a business school. I really thought that I would stay there for 2 years and or 3 years at max and come back, to the US. But it's one of those things in life that you can't predict. So we ended up staying for 23 years in France. We loved it. We got to love it. And basically, today, I, in fact, prefer the life in Europe over the life in the US. And that's one reason I'm choosing to, in fact, go back to Europe right now.
So, one comment, and I'm sure you will agree with that, is your wife appears to be much more brighter than you. Mm.
That's always the case. But that's what it should be.
So now tell me the story behind Global Innovation Index. How did you kind of think about that? You see, because well, first of all, I go back to your journey. We are talking about late 80s and early 90s, not about the GIC, but when you did both the degrees at the same time. Now, at that particular point in time, technology was not as pervasive as it is now. But now, fast forward on to the Global Innovation Index. So, what made you, develop this framework? I find it actually very fascinating when I look at it's got two components in terms of input, output, and how do you define the frameworks. So, what's the story behind that?
Yeah. No, it's very interesting how the whole thing happened. And today I'm very pleased that the United Nations adopted the Global Innovation Index in 2011. And today it is used in more than 150 countries around the world. In fact, including in India, Prime Minister Modi, refers to it very frequently. Niti Aayog uses it quite extensively. And the history of it really is as follows. I was in a business school, so I didn't really work with nation level discussions or national level issues, which typically happens in a government school. So in a business school, you deal with corporations and more micro issues. But then in 2002, I've been attending the Davos meetings for many years, and 2002 in the Davos meeting, they put together a small group to say, okay, look, why don't you come up with a model and framework for technology? So this was 2002. So that's where I came up with the Global Information Technology Report and the index, the Network Readiness Index on technology policy. So I got involved in sort of government level, national discussions, much more with the work at the World Economic Forum technology. And then that was adopted by many, many countries around the world, including in India. And basically, it's formed a very interesting avenue for my own connections with national policy discussions and national policy strategies. And then as I was working with different countries, I started noticing that there's a lot of innovation happening in many emerging markets, but that innovation was not being captured in the innovation metrics that were being used. So till I would say 2010, till 2010, most of the metrics used in innovation were more traditional metrics like, patents and PhDs and researchers and so on. And what I realized was that something obvious is that you don't need a PhD to innovate. A lot of innovations are happening without necessarily patents. You don't need a publication to be innovative. Now, clearly, those traditional metrics are still very important, but there's a broader sense of innovation that is important for us to recognize. So that's one reason why I created this Global Innovation Index, in which the basic premise is that innovation is much more broad-based. Anyone can innovate, even a farmer without a PhD can innovate. And for some time, it was difficult for the innovation community to accept that broader definition, but the UN adopted it in 2011. And since then, it has really been very, very influential. And to some degree, thanks to WIPO's support and WIPO's co-ownership of that model right now, a lot of the global discussions around innovation have really been influenced by the Innovation Index, including in India and many other countries.
And that's a fabulous story, I must say. Now, the concept of frugal innovation, which really became very popular at the time when Harvard published a book over there. So, any kind of, was that also one of the drivers to look at what emerging technology or what emerging economies were doing insofar as innovation is concerned?
Yeah, I think frugal innovation is one example of a kind of innovation that happens in many emerging markets that is not adequately captured, in traditional metrics of, patents, publications, PhDs, and so on. So what we have is we have a range of metrics that includes the traditional metrics and also some of the non-traditional metrics. And we also include elements that are perhaps new, like, for example, uh, innovation in online forums and blogs. This is important today. You cannot just ignore the innovation that happens in online forums. And we measure and we try and measure that also in the innovation index. So I think we take a much more broader, expanded view of innovation. And that, I think, is something which includes frugal innovation.
So, let me ask you a question: that do you think we can have an economy where everybody is innovating?
I think in principle, everyone is innovative, and I always refer to the example given by one of my colleague friends who says that, you take a 4-year-old child in any part of the world, be it in India and be it in Brazil or Australia, and you observe the behaviors of a 4-year-old child. A 4-year-old child is constantly observing the environment. You see them observing what is happening around them. A 4-year-old child is always asking questions, asking questions. You get sick and tired of the questions and trying to answer them. They're always experimenting, trying to do different things, trying to push the limits in different ways. They are very resilient. They, in fact, fail. They sometimes hurt themselves a little bit. They don't give up. They don't give up easily. They actually are perseverant. They're resilient. They actually keep on trying. And if they have any trouble, they actually go and ask for help to their parents, to their elder siblings or friends. And so they have a mentor network. So there are studies done of innovation or innovative leaders, and you ask the question, what are the behavior traits of innovative leaders? They are really around these elements of observation, of questioning, of experimentation, of perseverance, of having a mentor network. And every 4-year-old child exhibits those behaviors. So, in some sense, everyone has the basic DNA to be innovative. Interesting question is what happens in schools, universities, and companies that actually sometimes dampen some of that DNA.
so, so another point is that when we go back to 90s, we had business process reengineering, hmm, and we also had another term, and I move back to 2022, and we talk about incremental innovation. At the same time, we talk about a disruptive innovation. But to me, when I think back and I look at, the 90s, the concepts are still the same. So, what has happened since 90s to now to make innovation that much pervasive?
I think there's one important change that has happened is if you look at the business world, the dominant philosophy of improvement in business was of something called total quality management. So it started in the 1950s in Japan and then was adopted by US in 1980s. And TQM in its various forms, whether it's Six Sigma or Toyota production techniques, they all are basic variations of the total quality management philosophy. And all of that philosophy is based on incremental improvements. Okay, so you have a system that is running, and you continuously try to keep on improving, it in multiple ways. And that is very important. I don't want to make it appear that that is not important. A lot of the effort today in many organizations revolves around incremental improvements. In fact, some people argue that 60% of their innovation investments in most companies are on incremental improvements. But what has changed right now is that we're living in an age where computation and data have become much more extensive. So data and the power of data has increased tremendously. And so you're seeing a different kind of disruption or disruptive business models emerging that are powered by computation and driven by data. And so digital disruption is causing change at a very dramatic pace in organizations, whether it's retail, whether it's healthcare, whether it's other kinds of sectors. And that really is no longer incremental. So what is happening is the progress in digital technologies is causing a whole wave of disruptive, data-driven, computation-driven innovations, which cannot traditionally be handled by TQM approaches. That's one reason why you need to think differently about innovation today.
Now that you mentioned data, and that's a very key point at this particular point in time. And you look at the evolution of the web from web, 1.0 to 2.0 to now heading towards web 3.0. Now web 2.0 was all supposed to be about decentralization, but what happened? It had, led to concentration of power or really using our data or everybody's data and growing fabulous monopolies. Now we are heading towards Web 3.0, and again the same debate is coming about. Everybody is talking about a decentralized, where we own our own data kind of a thing. But at the same time, we have got this metaverses coming, mini metaverses coming in. So, what do you see the future?
So, technology will keep on evolving and the range of possibilities are going to keep on expanding dramatically. One of the first things I teach in my classes on digital transformation is just highlight the difference between a linear world and an exponential world. If you just take a linear series, go, let's say, one step every year, in 30 years, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, in 30 years, you hit 30. So you might say, well, 30 times in 30 years is not bad. But if you take a simple exponential series, let's say 2 to the power of 1, 2 to the power of 2, 2 to the power of 3, in 30 years, you hit 2 to the power of 30. And 2 to the power of 30 is 1 billion, which is 10 to the power of 9. And the difference between 10 to the power of 9 and 30 is the difference between an exponential world and a linear world. The challenge is that for a long time, the difference between an exponential curve and a linear curve is not very large. So for a long time, the exponential curve actually sort of follows a linear curve. And at some point, it diverges. Okay? And that after the divergence, the exponential curve just explodes. So what we have seen right now in the world of computation and data and so on is that for 30, 40 years, the linear and exponential curves were pretty much same. But in the last 10, 15 years, they're diverging at a very fast pace. And so what is happening right now is that there are new possibilities emerging every year. And this you see in the field of AI, that the complexity of the AI models is like increasing by a factor of 10 every 12 to 18 months. And that kind of increase of complexity is driving change in a way in which it is sometimes unpredictable. At the same time, it is actually concentrating power in many places. So if you're capable of handling that kind of power and complexity, like the big tech companies are capable of doing it, they're getting additional power in this system. So I personally agree with you, that I don't think so, despite the talk of decentralization in Web 3.0, I don't think so we will avoid this concentration of power in the Web 3.0 world. These big tech companies, they have too much power, they have too much money, too much data, and they are the only few who can invest in that kind of heavy technology investments required to benefit from all these exponential growth in data and computation.
Fabulous. Just love the thinking, Soumitra. Now, on a different track, When you took over as the founding dean at Cornell, now Cornell is very well known, but the business school was not that well known at that particular point in time. So what were you doing? Were you scratching your head, or what exactly was going on in your mind at that particular point in time?
It's a good question because I had the good fortune of being at INSEAD, and INSEAD had grown, from a medium-sized school in Europe to one of the biggest business schools in the world and one of the best. And I had seen the value of scale. Okay, so today in the business world and many sectors, big is can also be beautiful. So you can actually be big and beautiful, and scale gives a tremendous advantage. There is increasing concentration of few companies, dominating certain sectors, and the same is happening in the business school world. The big business schools have more resources, they have more scale. They can, in fact, attract more talent, give more scholarships, give more faculty, chairs, and they become bigger and better over time. When I went to Cornell, Cornell has, what I discovered, had four business schools, actually four schools teaching business. I was invited to be the dean of the graduate school, the MBA school. In addition to that, there was an undergraduate business program in the College of Agriculture. The agriculture economics program evolved over 20, 30, 40 years into a business program. And then there was a hotel school, which is a world, ranked number one in hospitality. That was really about service management, service sector management, and real estate finance. And then there was a fourth school on industrial labor relations, which was focused on human resource management. So if you combine the four schools, Cornell today is actually the biggest in the country, in America, in terms of business education, volume, and scale. It's actually bigger than Harvard, bigger than Wharton, bigger than Kellogg, and so on. So what I felt was that because that scale wasn't visible outside, Cornell was underachieving or missing some of the potential in business. So I actually made a proposal very early on that we have to bring the schools together because the scale was already there inside. It had to be brought together. To grow from, a certain one school and make it the same size as Harvard or Wharton would be much more difficult and take much more time. So in the end, the university agreed to that proposal, and I was given the permission to merge three of the four schools. So basically what I did was I merged three of the four schools. I helped create the College of Business, and the Cornell College of Business right now is the third largest in America. Okay, it's basically after Harvard and Wharton. And that actually gives it much more presence, much more brand, much more weight. And it's only a question of time before people start recognizing Cornell's College of Business as being one of the best in the country because it is already very good. It's just that the scale wasn't there to, in fact, give it the kind of visible presence in the global stage.
Now, you see, what happens in the case of education and higher education is that you got people with relatively higher level of intellectual capital, and thereby they tend to be operating more in silos. So, what were the challenges that you encountered? I mean, I can imagine that you are kind of combining three business schools. My God. So, how was the journey?
So, it's very interesting. That's probably been the best leadership experience in my life. I'm not sure I'll get a similar one in the future. But in America, as you know, uh, alumni are very, very close to their alma mater. Okay, it's almost as close to them as a family. So, the alumni is very much linked to their own institution. So when I started the process, I was expecting a lot of resistance from faculty and staff and students. But surprisingly, the major resistance came from the alumni. Okay, I was not expecting that. Uh, the general sort of reaction of many, not all, of some alumni was that, uh, you don't touch my family, and my school is just right there next close to my family. You know, it's much easier to start something new as opposed to take three existing organizations and merge them. And the biggest challenge that I faced was with executives. And for me, it was a surprise because these executives in the in the daily jobs, they're buying and selling companies, every other day. When it comes to merging the school in the same university and just creating a larger organization, they were deeply, at least not all, but some were deeply opposed to it. So it took a lot of explanation, a lot of, like classical change management, a lot of explanation to tell them why it is good for the school and why it will help make the school stronger and better. So, I'm happy that process actually went through, and we did the merger actually very fast. So one of the advice, I spoke to many alumni who lead mergers and asked them advice about, how do you lead a merger? I've never done it before. And they told me basically go deep and go fast. But that was the merger. That was the advice they told me. So merge as much as possible, as fast as possible. And that's what I did. And we finished the whole merger in less than 18 months. So it was a very big integration, and the good results of it are all actually showing up now over the years. So the school is able to hire people that it could not hire before. The school has many more resources because of the merger. The school has, obtained about $300 million in funding more. And I helped to raise one of the major naming gifts of $150 million for the school, but there's more money that has come in after I stepped down. So basically the school is richer, better, more powerful, and I think that's all good for the university.
So I've got hundreds of other questions, I want to ask you, and I'm sure that the people want to ask you, but in the interest of time, there are two last questions that I will ask you. One is that if you had to relive your life once again, what do you think you would have done or not done?
That's a difficult question. Um, the many ways in which perhaps, you might change your life, perhaps in retrospect, many things have been wonderful, so I will not change at all. The one thing that perhaps I think I would have done is got into entrepreneurship early. So today I look at so many bright young entrepreneurs who start wonderful companies and do wonderful things. And I just think that I'm also an entrepreneur in some sense, but I started my entrepreneurship journey a little bit too late. So I'd love to have started earlier, and that might have given me other kinds of new possibilities. So that's my only one, let's say, thing I've done differently. The rest I'm pretty much comfortable with the way things have turned out. So it's never perfect, it's never ideal, but I think it's pretty good. I'm very grateful for what I've got.
So you
Very
would
grateful.
still sit for JEE and all that?
Yes, I think so. I think in India, that's the best education you have. Getting through JEE is a nightmare, but I hope the exam system is modified a little bit in the future. I hope the IIT curriculum is more flexible. IIT curriculum is not very flexible, at least when we were there. So I hope IIT also makes more changes. It is making changes, but I hope it makes more changes in the years ahead. But I think it's a wonderful background, wonderful foundation, and no regrets of any kind.
So last question of the day is, what now you are going across to Oxford, and that business school is a well established business school. So what is your vision, and what are your thoughts about what you want to do at Oxford? Is it going to be
Yeah.
just kind of scratch on the chin and say this is very interesting? So what are your thoughts?
You know, Oxford is a very special university. I spent 6 months there on a sabbatical. My daughter is a graduate of Oxford, so I see
Wow.
from the parent side, I see it. It's almost a 900-year-old university, okay, and it's got very unique traditions and customs and ways of doing things. And guess what? The university is ranked number one, number two, number three in the top five almost all the time. So it's very highly ranked. So whatever they're doing is, of course, working. Yet at the same time, the university recognizes that has to change for the future. There are lots of very strong American, competing universities like Stanford and Harvard, and so there are lots of things the university also has to do change. One of which is actually integrate the business school much more into the heart of the university. The business school is well established, and I'm very grateful for all the good work done by my previous, predecessor, Dean Peter Tufano from ex-Harvard Business School. But it's a young business school. It's only about 26 years old, 25, 26 years old. And there's a lot of work required to actually position the business school much more at the heart of the university. If you look at most of the top American schools, all of them have a major business school really at the heart of the university, because today almost every discipline, be it law, be it veterinary science, be it medical science, be it any other discipline, needs a business element to succeed in the marketplace in the world. So that's my goal really, is to try to see how I can integrate the business school more inside the Oxford ecosystem. But also I do believe that this is a unique platform to do good for the world. Oxford is a unique brand, has got a unique ethos in terms of helping make the world a better place. And so I want to use, it's a privilege to be given that platform. So I want to use the platform of the side school and the Oxford environment to be able to create a positive change in the world through education for people around the world. So that's my goal, try and see if I can put the business school more in the center, make it much more stronger and better, more highly ranked, and at the same time, use the platform to do some good for the world in different parts of the world, including in India.
Professor Datta, I am proud of you. It has been a very, very enjoyable discussion, and I'm looking forward to getting you at this forum, again, because there are so many questions as the value of higher education. Education is coming into question. Business, technology, and other kind of, interactions. But with today, because of time, I have to say a big thank you to you. And ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to Soumitra as I look forward to welcoming one again in this platform and to uh, take over some more interesting discussions. Thank you
Thank you
once
so
again.
much, Pradeep. Thank you very much, and I look forward to interacting with you, and thank you for your friendship also.
So nice of you.
Nice to see you, Soumitra.
Thank you very much.
Jaggi.
I did. I see the name out there, I saw you.
So now I go across to three other stars who are known for more whining and dining. And I suppose the question that I have to ask to them is that what made them join Indian Foreign Service? Was it the notion of free travel at somebody else's cost? Was it whining and dining? Or was it making a contribution for your country? But jokes apart, please give a big round of welcome to Ambassador Kapur, Ambassador Lal, and Ambassador Ashok. We are having these three distinguished gentlemen who collectively, between the three of them, could be the foreign policy of India. When I look at where all they have spent their time in posting and represented the country at so many different international forums, my it would run like history book. Now we are at a particular point in time when we are seeing a Ukraine becoming a focus of the world. And while I know that there has been a lot of material which is there in the media on Ukraine at this particular point in time, but given the stalwarts that we have over here, I would be very keen to get their perspective in terms of what is happening in Ukraine. We all know that just why India has taken the position that it has, but what does it really mean? What is the end game and what exactly is happening? So, with this, let me kick off and I will go to some more interesting parts of the discussion later on. But let's go across to Pradeep Kapur. Pradeep. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
PK, I know that you have been speaking at so many different forums on this. So, what exactly is, how important is Ukraine for us in India? What is happening? What is the end game? I mean, it seems to be getting protracted day by day. The ramifications of the global economy are, one can see what is happening. But looking at from number of perspectives, what's your take on the Ukraine situation?
Thank you. Thank you, Pradeep. Before I discuss Ukraine, if you permit me, first of all, I want everybody to give a round of applause to Pradeep Khanna, my batchmate and very dear friend, for the outstanding work that you keep on doing, even in the middle of the morning or the middle of the night. And 1 a.m., 1:30 a.m., 4 a.m., I talk to you You're bright awake, so it's absolutely amazing. And congratulations to you. But you're being very ambitious today, Pradeep. Having 4 people, including a person like Soumitra Dutta, such a bright person on this panel, is to fit them within an hour and a half.
No,
I don't know
my objective is this is just an introduction. This is just a way of a more, ingrained, involving sessions and times ahead to come. So back to you, Pradeep.
but Professor Datta, I was at Oxford in 85, 86 at the Queen Elizabeth House. Now, all the best for your stint there, but also with Pradeep's permission and support, we want to invite you for speaking on a social impact innovation aspect at the conference which Wheels Global Foundation is organizing in Banaras Hindu University in November 4, 5, 6. This is Stanford University. Wheels is basically IIT, Pan IIT alumni, and some other universities like University of California, Santa Clara, Johns Hopkins, Banaras Hindu University, IITs, etc. November in Varanasi, 4, 5, 6, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Pradeep Khanna is already invited, but we'd like to invite you also. This is on envisioning global development through rural empowerment and rural transformation. That is the main theme. So that's why social impact innovation. That would
Thank
be.
you so much, Ambassador Kapur. I'll certainly look forward to getting more details.
Yeah, so it'll be very fascinating to hear your thoughts on this also, since you have done so much work on this area. But good to see Ralte and good to see Ashok here. I probably am the pioneer from IIT Delhi to have, used up a lot of time during MTech to study for the IAS exams and join the IFS as the first one from there. But coming to the more immediate pressing issues at hand, my thoughts on this are quite different from a lot of people in the sense when I scan the pages of history, I see 1955 Austria declared itself permanently neutral between East and West Europe and Russia and USSR at that time and had peace and still has peace. Then come to Switzerland, they did something similar. Then come to the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1963. The Russians tried to position missiles in Cuba. The US objected very strongly. Why? They said, this is too close to home for comfort. Don't do it. We'll not allow you. Now, turn the mirror around. The NATO and the US are trying to do something similar onto Russia. Position, their forces, NATO, make Ukraine a member of NATO, then put their missiles there. How far is Ukraine from Moscow? Very near. What are the threats to Russia? Phenomenal. What is the land border between Ukraine and Russia? Massive. Ukraine is the second biggest country in Europe after Russia. It's the biggest country of Europe other than Russia. So there is a massive land border between the two countries, and to then attack or outflank Russia from the North Baltics, Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, etc., which are NATO countries already, some of them, and some of them are in the process of becoming full-fledged NATO countries. And then Ukraine on the southern part, and Russia is in very deep problems. Now, if Russia has been saying for months that this is not permissible, this is not acceptable, please don't do this. Keep NATO out of Ukraine and Ukraine out of NATO. What would have been an easy solution? It's obvious. Kissinger has written a lot about it. Henry Kissinger, whom, generally is not at all liked in India because of his other, positions on so many other issues concerning India. So, and he's no friend of India, but his writings on Ukraine are very well known since the time of the fall of the Soviet Union. I was actually in Georgetown University as a faculty member, the first foreign service or Indian government officer posted in this place in the School of Foreign Service. Madeleine Albright was a faculty member there, Secretary of State. And there were a lot of others who were very impactful in US policy making. Thomas Pickering, etc., who became ambassador to India, etc. Now, the dialogue at that time was that now that we have broken up USSR, we are going to do this in Russia. We're going to do that. We are going to put our template for social systems, our template for economic systems. I said, are you doing this in discussion with the Russians? They said, we don't need to discuss with them. I said, well, I am not sure that's the right policy, but there were no takers for that. Now, same thing Thomas Friedman has written, same thing that Professor from Chicago University, lots of people have written that the very steps which the West took after the fall of USSR is the reason for all these problems in Europe today. Russia applied to become a member of NATO, it was not allowed. So to continue to treat a country which has such a past and such a future and such a present in terms of its science, technology, maths, history, etc., as if they are nothing, you are bound to come to a situation like this, where they were putting 190,000 troops on the border for so many weeks and saying that, please, Ukraine, declare yourself that you will not become a member of NATO, or asking NATO to do the same, and nothing happened. Now, India's position, Chapter 6 of UN talks about negotiations. India's position always has been negotiations, negotiations, negotiations. I'll stop here.
So beautiful to look at the historical perspective. Now I'll go across to Lal. Ambassador Lal, what are your thoughts on this?
I told you when we had a pre-talk that I am not up to date.
That is immaterial. As a foreign service officer, looking at what is happening, just your perspectives.
Yeah, I had left this kind of matters to PK and to
Okay, I love that. I love that.
Ashok to answer. But of course, I mean, as a person, I have some ideas and views on them too. True. The West, I think, as PK said, is pushing too much. There are limits. We have different systems. We have the socialist system, we have the capitalist system, democratic, slightly undemocratic. In fact, the Chinese say that they're the most democratic society. Their party works under the democratic system. And we all know that in the very democratic country of the US, it's the lobbyists which have the biggest say. And even now, today, people are saying that the Ukraine war is being pushed by the arms lobby. Of course, everybody has an agenda. The Chinese have an agenda. We also have an agenda. So whose agenda is it? So it's like what PK says is the agenda of the US to and the US and whatever the rest of the West are to push their system into former Soviet Union, East European countries, including Ukraine, then they're pushing.
I agree with. I mean, it's a very very fascinating perspective, and which is very much different from what I read in the newspaper and the media in Australia. But I can understand. But now I want to move across to Ashok. Ashok, what are your thoughts?
Well, to begin with, Pradeep, thank you for inviting me to this discussion. I echo a large part of what Pradeep Kapur has said about the background to this whole issue and the issue of neutrality. You see, the US believes that it's the only country which should have a Monroe Doctrine. Now, this is a contradictory position. How can, when missiles are put in Cuba, then they get agitated enough to go very close to having a world war? When somebody does anything in any Central American, South American country, they want to intervene there. I don't remember the exact number, but it's a very large number of countries in which, since World War II, America has intervened to change governments. So I find it very contradictory and very double-faced for them to look at what is happening between Russia and Ukraine and expect that nothing will happen when they position their forces and when they intend to include Ukraine as a part of NATO. The other problem is that historically, Ukraine and Russia are one people. They, the Kievan Rus, or origins of Ukraine, are the origins of Russia. So it is a very, today, the Ukrainians, Zelensky and others may say whatever they like, but the fact is that these are one people. They are not two separate ethnicities or religions or groups. So from that perspective, this whole issue is being misunderstood by the West for the reasons which Ralte also mentioned. The military industrial complex of the West will be very happy if a war continues to happen. Everybody else wants to make sure that my way is the best way. And so if capitalism in American capitalist systems must be prevailing, then nothing else should prevail. But to be honest, since World War II, you yourself quoted the instance of Switzerland, the instance of, I'm quoting the instance of Finland, and other countries which have exercised neutrality. Now, why did Finland exercise neutrality? For the very same reason that Russia is asking Ukraine to exercise neutrality and not join NATO. But when it comes to Ukraine, they have a double face. The other point I wanted to mention to you is that I don't know how many people are aware, I'm sure by now everybody is aware, that Russia also wanted to join NATO. The fact of the matter is that in 1990, when the Soviet Union broke down and when Russia emerged, the nascent Russia under Gorbachev was actually keen on joining NATO because they said there is no threat now left and there's no reason why we should be inimical to each other. So let us start a dialogue to seeing whether we can cooperate through a forum like NATO. At that time, the West was so filled with its own sense of pride, particularly the US, and they were so full of themselves that they couldn't look to the possibility of including Russia as a member of a collective security arrangement in the world, Europe and the rest of the world. So one chance was let to slip. Yeltsin, some years down the line, offered to another US president the possibility of joining NATO. Again, these guys said, oh, you are a country which no longer has any power and we don't need to see you in NATO. Then Putin, 2000, made a similar offer and was expressed his interest in doing so. Again, the West sort of sniffed at him and said, who are you? Your economy is in a shambles and we don't think we can't speak as equals. Till 2007, that is from 1990 to 2007, Russia did not do any intervention. It was only after 2007 that they started the first intervention in Georgia. And slowly, one by one, these interventions continued. And in 2011, you had the situation where Russia was also in conflict with their own, because they were seeing that their own sphere of influence was getting threatened. So one by one, whether it was Georgia or it was Abkhazia or it was the other republics, they were seeing their space shrinking. And finally, in 2014, they took over Crimea. And Crimea, in fact, remained part of Russia. It did not get included in the original Ukraine. It was handed over in 1954 by Khrushchev to the then Ukrainian SSR, which means it's like somebody handing over Visakhapatnam to Telangana. It's not a question of handing over to a different country. Now, the Crimea is the location of the Black Sea Fleet. Sevastopol is their port. Where do you expect in winter the Russians to park their nuclear submarines, their nuclear aircraft carriers, and their ships and other stuff when you take away Crimea and give it away to Ukraine? So is it very surprising that the Russians said, no way? I mean, I would love to know whether the Americans would be happy to have presence of nuclear armed Russia in the Gulf of Mexico, and will be happy to go through the Gulf of Mexico with the Russians in it. This is exactly what the Americans are asking, that you allow Crimea to be part of Ukraine. How can you do that when to get to Crimea, you have to pass through parts of Ukraine? And that is precisely why this has happened. The last point, I know I'm getting a little expansive. The last point is that the eastern part of Ukraine, Donbass region, which comprises Donetsk and Luhansk, these are areas which are of ethnic majority Russian. They are not ethnic majority Ukrainian. I know I said that the two are same, but there is a difference between Telugus and Tamils. The same kind of difference is there between Ukrainians and Russians. And with an ethnic majority of Russians, there were between 2014 and 2022, 8 years, there have been documented instances of attacks on Russians, ethnic Russians. You think that a country the size of Russia will not want to protect its people? I mean, just today I saw the movie Kashmir Files. You know, it evokes a lot of passion. And I'm not surprised to see when you have the groups of people attacking the people in Donbass area, that Russia was wanting to protect them and ensure that this never happened again. So if you see the map now also, it looks to me like the Russians are keen on ensuring that the eastern part, which has a majority ethnic Russian, not majority ethnic Ukrainian, will never revert to Ukraine. So I think we have to see all of these issues in perspective before we make a judgment about whether Putin is right or whether Biden is right or whether West is right. So I'll leave it at that.
Fabulous. Love it. Now, on a different track, let me go across to Pradeep. You see, Pradeep, you've been ambassador at Chile, you've been ambassador at Cambodia. Now, there is a very large or very famous Indian temple, Angkor Wat. Now, when you were there, I believe it was in kind of getting a bit dilapidated and there was some repair work happening. And I don't know what was the relationship between the two countries, but how did that actually happen? You know, what exactly were the dynamics?
So thank you, Pradeep. When I joined in Cambodia, this was 2001, there were 38 countries working in those temples. Those temples is not one temple, it's hundreds of temples,
Oh, I see.
or even more than hundreds of temples, and some of the biggest temples in the world. The scale is something mind-boggling. Till you go and see that, you can never imagine that that can be the scale of temples. So 38 countries and, you know, renovation agencies, the archaeological agencies from different countries were working there. And those temples have been built with the support of Indian sculptors, Indian scholars, Indian rishis, Indian munis, Indian travelers, Indian migrants into those countries, Southeast Asia entirely, for thousands of years. Now, as the ambassador of India, I reached there and I go to that, Siem Reap, the Angkor Wat area, as it is called, with more than 400 temples just in that area. And I am very proudly shown all the renovation work going on. And I had worked earlier as Director South when we were repairing Angkor Wat, main Angkor Wat temple itself. And now there are 38 countries and India is nowhere on the horizon. So I have already done some research and I start digging much deeper. And India is not even being allowed to be there. And when the UNESCO people come in, the chief of UNESCO and the others, and I'm introduced to the 3 experts working on Cambodia. One expert is from France, one expert from Italy, one expert from Japan.
And these
And
are
I asked myself,
Indian temples, huh?
Indian temples. So you can imagine my horror to be told that these are the experts who are making decisions for the world on these temples. So in my mind, the question was, where is the Indian expert? How can they do anything here without consultation with the Indians? And there are Chinese who are renovating temples there who have done, nothing like that in their own country in terms of pagodas and wats and all the Buddhist monuments. And there are, Russians and Poles and Bulgarians and everybody under the sun, Canada and, the range of it, Switzerland, Germany. USA. So I get down to work on it. And what it was basically a lot of politics. India had worked on those temples from 1986 to 1993, when nobody was coming into Cambodia, when it was war-torn with the Pol Pot regime having, just been thrown out. And the work which India did in those 7 years was absolutely phenomenal. But that work was portrayed to the world as being absolutely disastrous. It was a very big black mark against the Archaeological Survey of India. So they said that India, instead of repairing and renovating the main Angkor Wat, has created a lot of difficulties and problems and degraded the temple. So I was very shocked at that politics, and the world was accepting that algorithm, that sort of theory. So I had to get down to work. I asked the Archaeological Survey of India, I asked the Cambodian government, with our relations of thousands of years, why are you not speaking up for the work done by India? They said, sir, we cannot speak up because we don't have a single piece of paper about the documentation, about the work done by India. I said, is that true? They said, yes, that is true. Then I asked the Archaeological Survey of India, Cambodian government at the level of the king and the prime minister and the others are telling me that they don't have a single piece of paper. Is that true? They said, yes, that is true. I said, where is all that paper? They said, in 7 different offices of the Archaeological Survey of India, who had sort of kept it as their proprietary documents and intellectual property rights.
Really?
And were not willing to share with it, part with it. So with the help of the PMO and the force of the Ministry of External Affairs being brought down to bear upon this Archaeological Survey of India, PM Vajpayee, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, hats off to him. He was to come there for a visit. They asked me, what are your expectations? I said, my expectation is documentation for the work done by India in Cambodia. So the first round of documentation was prepared by Archaeological Survey of India. Before the first visit of the Prime Minister came to Cambodia after 50 years, by the way, during my time, but came twice to Cambodia within a year. So first visit, we prepared the first volume of documentation, handed it to Cambodia. And our discussion started about India coming back into play in Cambodia. Second visit of the Prime Minister, we handed over the complete documentation. And we had to go through, you can imagine the sort of obstacles with all those countries ranged against India and UNESCO siding with them. And India as a lone ranger country fighting this massive battle, more than a world war, to just tell them that. So what happened was, it was very difficult even for the Archaeological Survey of India teams to be posted to Delhi for 3 months. 7 teams from 7 different centers. No work. Bring all your big suitcases and bags and boxes and cartons of documents from Cambodia times, sit in Delhi, put it into documentation. And the phases of the documentation also, which I had to go through with Archaeological Survey of India, the before pictures and the after pictures, and the before pictures are better than the after pictures. I said, are you trying to justify the French allegations? So anyway, they put out documentation, which again was the best documentation ever for Archaeological Survey of India in their 150 years of existence with the Prime Minister. And now their standard of publications is very high because of that intervention. They continue on a good trajectory. So in Cambodia, what happened? After the second presentation of documents, we made a presentation in the international community meeting in Cambodia, which is held called the International Coordination Committee on Angkor. The whole world is present there practically every year. So I made the statement that from the first brick of Angkor Wat temple to the stone on the shikhar of the Gopuram of the highest point of the temple, India has intervened. India is proud of its intervention. India has submitted all the documentation of its intervention. If anybody in the world wants to challenge that intervention, we are happy to discuss. If there's even the smallest thing which is pointed out, which is incorrect, we will rectify it. And the work done by the Indian experts during that period was the most difficult work by any agency any time in the history of the world. There were Khmer Rouge soldiers and rebels firing on the Indian experts working in Cambodia in Angkor Wat temples. Their lives were under threat. There was no accessibility to that temple area from the capital Phnom Penh. The Russian helicopter would fly once randomly in a month or two. Indians would rush in their supplies. Our experts were ill on the site. They had to be evacuated by those temples. It was the most impossible and difficult situation. Under those circumstances, without hammers, without chisels, without material, without food, to work in that remote area at that time was the most phenomenal work. When we finished, and including with the Director General of Archaeological Survey of India, there was thunderous applause for many minutes, standing ovation. The whole hall, the UNESCO chief came to me, he said, Ambassador, after today, India will never have to defend the work which it has done in those years. I was not satisfied with that. The French ambassador, later we signed the agreement with PM Vajpayee to do the biggest intervention in Cambodia for the restoration of one of the biggest monuments called Taprom. It is the biggest enterprise of restoration and renovation in the history of the world, again, by being done by India and Cambodia, from a point where we were not even being allowed to step into the whole area to restore. We are now doing the biggest temple. Even now it continues. But on that day when we signed that document, the French ambassador in Cambodia, I roped in the French scholars also because they had been opposing. I know French. I collaborated with them. I made them organize conferences to discuss about India and India's temples, because they're very fond of Indian culture. That is their biggest, sort of pleasure in life. So roping them into my efforts, and when the day we signed this finally, the French ambassador came up to me. I must make this statement here in front of everybody. He said, Monsieur l'ambassadeur, la reconquête du Cambodge par l'Inde recommence aujourd'hui. For those who don't understand French, he said to me, the French ambassador tells me as the Indian ambassador, that Mr. Ambassador, the reconquest of Cambodia by India recommences today. We salute you.
Fabulous, fabulous. Look, you've written so many books. This could possibly be another big story by itself. It's absolutely lovely to hear that.
But Pradeep, just the last comment on that. I was not even satisfied with that. I said, this is a verbal statement which you're telling me. I want it in writing. Thereafter, what happened? 2003, the 10th anniversary of 1993, the intervention then started by the global community. 2003, if you see the records, November 2003, Paris, the global community got together for discussion on Angkor. At that time, the French government put it on record in writing that the work done by India between the period 1986-1993 on the Angkor Wat temple was very good, and we appreciate it. That was the first time it was put in writing. After that, it is all calm waters and everything is going very, very well.
Fabulous, fabulous. Hey, what lovely stories. It got me so enthralled and enraptured into it. Now, from there, I want to go across to Lal. Lal, you were in China and in Hong Kong at certain points in time. Did the Tiananmen Square happen during one of your postings in China?
Yeah, it sort of came about. But you asked about Hong Kong also. Hong Kong is where I started as a young probationer in my service life. Ashok was already there for 1 year. So I joined him in Chinese university to study Mandarin. I was fortunate to get posted on to Beijing from Hong Kong after 2 years, 85, 86 in Hong Kong, 87 across to China, Beijing. So 87 was a nice year. 88 was a nicer year because we had the first visit of an Indian Prime Minister after many, many years, since 62. So it was a path-breaking visit. But 89 was your Tiananmen Square, which was even more interesting. Our flat was on what is called a Chang'an. So it's a long avenue of peace. And from our flat to Tiananmen Square, it's about 1.5 kilometers. And if we looked out from our 13th floor balcony, we could see some of the monuments on Tiananmen Square. And that was the main street where a lot of the action took place.
So tell me when the action actually happened. So what was your role as a government representative over there? Was it just to kind of maintain, calm while all this was happening, or was it to kind of, what exactly were your reactions as a representative of India over there?
As a representative, you try and figure out whether it's a real thing. You try and figure out who are behind, what is the reason, and what is the future. And so in order to advise your government what is the way they should look at a situation, who are the people we should be talking to, who are the people we should keep an eye on. So obviously, the ambassador had his team moved out in all different sections of the governance and the students and the workers who were now coming in to support the students. So it was an interesting time where...
Very, very fascinating to see that you were there at such historical moments, and representing the government. Oh, well, fabulous. Now move across to Ashok. Ashok, I want to pick up on the time when India conducted the nuclear explosion. If I recall, it was 1997. 1998. Okay. So what were you doing at that time, and what was your role, or how were you in any role where you had to kind of defend India to the rest of the world?
Absolutely. In between 95 and 98, I was posted as Director External Relations in the Department of Atomic Energy.
Oh, you were in the hot seat at that time. Oh, I see.
Yeah, which actually is they always have one person from the Foreign Service in the Department of Atomic Energy who advises the chairman on issues relating to international affairs such as NPT, CTBT, FMCT, and so on, and also examines the international collaborations between India and other countries in the area of atomic energy. So this, in effect, I was staff officer to the chairman and advising him in this respect. So it was in a way very gallery, sitting in the gallery and watching the show from a very position of great vantage. And it was quite an amazing experience in many ways. The other job I had was that I was also a parallelly alternate representative of India at the IAEA in Vienna. And so I would go for the General Conference meetings every year, and also for special board meetings when required. So in that sense, it was very exciting. You may be aware that in 1995, India was trying to conduct the second round of tests. The first round was in 1974. The second round of tests under Prime Minister Narasimha Rao. But at that time, there was not adequate preparation done, and we did not realize how much security and guard we need to do to prevent agencies like the CIA and the US satellites from detecting what we were going to do. And as a result, the United States detected that we were carrying out preparations for a possible test in 1995. And they called us up on it. And well, they effectively sort of threatened, saying that if it happens, then, we will have consequences. And Narasimha Rao, our then Prime Minister, called it off. So it did not happen. Then in 1996-97, we had what you call the annual Prime Ministers of India. We had Gujral and Gowda and Gujral. So it was a difficult period in which no decisions were being taken on these issues. In 1998, when Prime Minister Vajpayee came in, his first item on the agenda was, we must go and test. And this time, the Department of Atomic Energy and the DRDO, the Defense Research Development Organization, which at that time, the scientific advisor to the Prime Minister was Dr. Abdul Kalam, who later became President of India. So these two stalwarts, Dr. Chidambaram, who was Chairman of Atomic Energy Commission, and Dr. Kalam, who was in DRDO and scientific advisor to the Prime Minister, these two stalwarts made a great deal of planning along with other people in the Bhabha Atomic Research Center and in the Defense Research Development Organization to make up a charade whereby we would conduct do all the digging and the preparatory work for this explosions under cover of secrecy. And this was the whole plan, which was executed with a tremendous amount of secrecy. The secrecy was so high that within the Department of Atomic Energy, nobody who did not need to know knew anything about it. And I'm talking of a department in Bhabha Atomic Research Center. It's got 63,000 scientists.
Oh.
Barely a handful knew that something was going to happen. And even I, who was the staff officer to the chairman, while I had a vague sort of notion that something was being planned, had no idea of the time, place, or occasion. And I was just told by the chairman in March. He said, your family is in Bombay, your wife and child are in Bombay. I said, yes. So is it possible for you to come to Delhi to assist me? I just need some help in Delhi. So I said, sure, sir, I'll come. When do you want me to come? Tomorrow. And how long do you want me to stay? He said, I'll let you know about when you can go back. So I stayed in Delhi till the Pokhran explosions took place on May 11th and May 13th and beyond also. So it was then that this whole planning was done. And it's amazing the amount of strategy which was done. We had to track the satellites, the Department of Atomic Energy and Space and DRDO, all three joined together to determine when the satellites of the Americans were overhead. At that time, no work could be done. Most of the work was done anyway at night, but the camouflage was done in such a way that when you look from a satellite, you see there is only a tent and nothing else over the sand of Rajasthan. So this was the kind of work which was done day in and day out for for several weeks. And then the tests were finally conducted on May 11th and May 13th in the Pokhran range. So it was a very, very interesting and exciting time. And for me, sitting in Delhi, I was, the moment the test happened, there was going to be not just a there was no radioactive fallout because it was underground, but there was going to be a diplomatic fallout. So at that point, the chairman said, now is when your work begins. You manage the diplomatic fallout. So the first thing we did was we had this huge press conference at which the chairman, Atomic Energy, Chidambaram, Kalam, the special scientific advisor, and Kakodkar, the director BARC, and Santanam from DRDO, all sat together. And we had this huge international press from, you name the organization, CNN, BBC, everybody was there. And they were asking all kinds of questions about why, how, yield, everything. And so it was, for me as a young officer, it was a fantastic opportunity to see what kind of a show was being enacted. And immediately after this, this was in May. In June, we had the June board meeting of the IAEA. The IAEA was founded in 1954, and since the beginning, we have been a founder member and a member of the board of governors of the IAEA. There was a real fear in the minds of all of us in the AE that we might be thrown out of the membership of the board of governors because of these tests, and the other consequences might follow. But so the chairman told me, go to Vienna and attend the board and make sure that nobody issues any condemnation and so on, and that we don't get out of the board. So along with, there's always a guy from Atomic Energy in Vienna also. So between him and me, we coordinated this, did the June board, and worked on the statements. And we managed to remove the word condemnation and make it just deplore. So then I come back to Bombay and tell the chairman, and say, you went only for one word to change the word condemnation to deplore. But this is the Foreign Service, and this is how drafting goes on. And it was a great thing. And of course, there was no question of removing us from the board. Though Pakistan tried their level best to remove us from the board, nothing happened. We continued on the board. And thereafter, it was very interesting to see how the reaction of US and others actually changed. The Clinton government started feeling that there was a justification for what was done, and so on. And the talks between Jaswant Singh and Strobe Talbot commenced shortly thereafter. And then thereafter, of course, today we are in a completely different position in the nuclear arena than we were then. I might mention in passing that we knew the Pakistanis were going to test after we tested, because it was a kind of an inevitability. So, but they tested only 2 weeks after we tested. So the joke in the Atomic Energy Department was that the texts were all in Chinese, and these guys had to translate it. The Pakistanis had to translate it. They took 2 weeks to translate it, and that's why they took 2 weeks to do the tests. But they wanted to equal the number of tests we had done. But they, of course, made a mistake in the fact that we did one in 74, which they didn't count. So anyway, the point is that thereafter, the change which has happened, frankly, I'm myself amazed, because I did not anticipate that the world would eventually come to accept a nuclear India, but it has. And today, they may not say that we are a member of the NPT, they may not say we are a nuclear weapon state, but de facto, we have been accepted as a nuclear weapon state. So it's a very, very interesting period of my life. And I really am thankful that I had that opportunity.
I am proud of all three of you. You guys have rewritten history books and all that kind of a thing. And it's such a great the stories that you have to tell. Now, going on to Pradeep. Pradeep, all of you guys have been interacting with global dignitaries. Did you have any interesting or a hilarious situation or a funny situation with any global figure?
Well, a lot actually. I don't know which one to narrate here, but I'll narrate a positive one here. When the first India-ASEAN summit meeting was to take place, Cambodia was the chairman of ASEAN at that time. It's a rotating chairmanship. Every year it changes. And so the meeting was to be in Cambodia. I was the ambassador of India to Cambodia. And I had been working very, very closely with the Cambodians for, more than many months. And the first visit of Prime Minister Vajpayee to Cambodia was in the context of bilateral discussions with Cambodia about various things, projects by India and Cambodia, etc., and also about this summit meeting. Other countries were trying very hard to keep India away from this summit or create complications during the summit so that it wouldn't happen in a good way. There were too many forces at work. And my challenge as the ambassador was to have a sense of those and deal with those in collaboration with India and Cambodia. and we succeeded in sort of, controlling and managing all those efforts at derailing this process. And finally, the day comes for the summit meeting. There's the Prime Minister, delegation, National Security Advisor, Foreign Minister, the entire, other ministers. And after, a full day of discussions with the ASEAN leaders and the Indian Prime Minister, it's called India-ASEAN Summit Meeting, meaning at the Prime Minister level, the first meeting which took place. And I wanted it said and started on a good way because, as they say, a thing well begun is half done. So during the meeting, the formal part of it, the Prime Minister of Cambodia makes the opening statement as chairman. The Indian Prime Minister responds, and all the 10 leaders of ASEAN, they speak turn by turn about their vision of India-ASEAN's collaboration, relations, future, next steps, outcomes, etc. And then the Indian Prime Minister or anybody appointed by the Indian Prime Minister is supposed to reply to the points raised by those 10 leaders. So we are going through all the protocols and steps one by one. And Prime Minister Vajpayee, a very fun person, absolutely great intellectual and very full of humor all the time. Created a lot of humor during his 2 visits to Cambodia also. A lot of fun for the Indian community and for the global community. So at that stage, when Yashwant Singh as foreign minister asked him, sir, who should respond to these leaders' comments? So he said, "आप भी तैयारी रखो, हम देख लेंगे किसको करना है." So all of us are making very copious notes, sitting in the second row and listening to each and every word being said by these 10 leaders and making long notes and then collating it in 2-3 minutes, 5 minutes and putting it in front of the Prime Minister to decide who's going to mention from those notes. He says, okay, leave it here. So, and then he announces to the world, because all the delegations of all the countries who are not allowed into that room are watching on big screens in the big halls, fallout halls, overflow halls in their rooms, etc., television screens everywhere. So Prime Minister Vajpayee, after pausing for a minute, he says, "Ki aap logon ne," means in English also. I hope everybody understands Hindi. He said, all of you leaders have made very good points. And we all appreciate the phenomenal interventions that you guys have made. What I want to say is that if I start and answer all those points now, what will we have left to discuss in our next meeting? So the whole hall burst into absolutely loud laughter. I could hear laughter all around the conference venue and the hotel rooms. So everybody was laughing and couldn't control their laughter, and the meeting ended on that happy note. So after that, everything has been going very, very well with the India-ASEAN Summit process.
Excellent, excellent. Ralte, any interesting or a funny movement involving any global leader during your tenures?
You want that something like a closing statement that takes up the bottom. Well, anyway, so what one has to do for God and country, it was not mine, but I was involved in the process. 84 assassination of Indira Gandhi, lots of world leaders and all came in for the funeral, and presidents, prime ministers, sons, and their representatives. One person was Imelda Marcos, representing the Philippines. So on the day of the cremation, they were all to go to Rajghat for the ceremony. But they were not allowed to take their individual carcades because that would cause too much of a traffic jam. So they were all asked to come to India Gate, where at a certain point they were gathered, put into luxury buses. And they were all taken in several buses quite to the place of cremation. Unfortunately, Mrs. Marcos arrived rather late after all the luxury buses had gone. And the CRPF duty bus, this is 1984, so many years ago. DTC buses, almost like our time, where the first rung of the ladder step is no longer there. So she came, and the deputy chief of protocol, good friend of mine, now he was my boss at the time. He's also since retired. He said, there she was, and no more buses. So I told her, Madam, you want to go for the cremation, you have to get onto this bus. She said, can't I take my car? So the security people said, no. So she was stuck. To go, you had to go on the DTC bus if you want to go. Otherwise, go back to your hotel. So she said, okay, I'll go. So, she wears skirts. So DTC bus, no first step. So he says, I watched her trying to get up on the bus. She tried once. The first time she could not even reach the first step, which is actually the second step, because the skirt was tight. So the second time she managed to put her foot on the step, but she just could not pull herself up. So it was getting late. The CRPF had to be on duty over there, following the buses. So the third time she tried, I just closed my eyes and held and pushed. So, for God and country, one has to do all kinds of things.
Oh my God. What about you, Ashok? Ashok, you might be on mute.
Yeah. So Ralte began by mentioning a very interesting story, and I have many such interesting stories, some even more non-vegetarian than the one he mentioned. Because in the course of our careers, we are required to do all kinds of strange things. I do not think this is the venue when I can mention many of those stories. So I will take the most vegetarian of the non-vegetarian stories, which is how I managed to get in touch with royal blood. The King of Sweden had come on a state visit, and when he was leaving, he was in the ceremonial lounge at the then Palam Airport, Indira Gandhi International Airport, and he needed to use the restroom. So I directed him to the restroom. He went in and didn't come out for some time. And then I was a little concerned. Then finally he did come out with his handkerchief clasped around his hand. So I said, Excellency, what has happened? So he said, I'm sorry, I got cut. The tap those days, I hope we have better taps now, was so rusty and so difficult to open that he had cut his hand in the process of doing it. So he said, no, it doesn't matter. And, he was a man who believed, Carl Gustav, he was the man who believed in a lot of protocol. So he did not want to make a fuss. And by then the time for the departure to the aircraft had arrived and we were all moving. So we reached the aircraft and he put out his hand to me, shook my hand and left. And then when he left, I realized I had royal blood on my hand because the poor guy had bled on, was still bleeding him.
Oh man.
So,
See, it's with all three of you, it is such a wonderful and interesting time. And let me reiterate that this was just the introduction. You know, Purely in the interest of time, I have to end the session today. But I will be calling each one of you again, and maybe individually, because all of you have such rich histories, and such good instances where you've been involved. And it will be lovely to hear that. So, with that, a big thank you to all three of you.
Thank you.
It was absolutely fabulous to, hear about such things. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to Pradeep, Lal, as well as Ashok.
Thank
And
you.
like I said, that between the three of them, they are almost the foreign policy of India. And the kind of stories that they have said, and each one of them we could spend hours on together. And I do have plans. This is what I wanted to do, was to set the tone, ringing for times ahead to come. So with that, we end GCC 25, and on GCC 26, which is going to be on 9th of April, which is again a Saturday, we will have Arjun Malhotra, who is the co-founder of Hindustan Computers, which is now called HCL, and also been involved into whatever you can talk in terms of regarding whether it is NIT, whether it is Pan India, whether it is Wheels, and so many other things. Along with that, we will have two lovely ladies from IIT Delhi. One, a young IAS officer, and one who is a professor of environmental management at IIM in Himachal Pradesh. But more about that in the times ahead. And we've got some more interesting stories. We'll have stories about the Ashoka University. We will have stories about Pan IIT. We'll have stories about Wheels, which as I जिसको कहते हैं ना प्यार से कहते हैं ऑटोमोबाइल कंपनी है शायद but jokes apart, once again, thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for listening to such and joining in and making GCC a community that it is. With that, this is Pradeep from Sydney signing off. Till next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.